Là. Attends, c'est où que je le fais? Là. Ah non, d'accord. Ouais.
Moi, j'ai rien ici.
En tout cas, il dit please ask the host to give you. Je refais.
Ouais.
Bah là, il me redit la même chose.
Alors, c'est moi qui l'ai fait.
Toi, tu peux me donner la permission?
Done. Allez.
Je refais.
Ouais.
Recording in progress.
Ok. Ça, record. Ok. Je me mets derrière la cam. Martin Chic. La classe.
Voilà. C'est pas. 2 minutes et c'est notre salon de communauté.
Notre salon personnel.
Vous êtes plus près?
Avec un gestion et un gestion.
C'est le sun des spotlights. Tu vois bien?
Mon public a toujours des lunettes.
Hein?
Mon personnage public a toujours des lunettes.
Les lunettes de soleil? La classe.
Depuis 2020.
Ok.
C'est ma première apparition.
Tu veux que je me mette là avec toi?
Ouais.
Il fait froid, tu peux te couvrir avec ça.
Qu'est-ce qu'on fait?
C'est très bizarre, probablement, parce qu'il y a 7 personnes qui ont passé à côté, je ne sais pas, elles sont peut-être passées de l'autre côté. Ou bien tu les as chassées.
Et la janquette.
Pardon?
Attends 5 minutes, une minute, 2. Ouais, c'était perdu.
C'était qui est venu?
Je sais pas, c'est 7 personnes. Je ne connais pas ces personnes.
Online, il y a.
En ligne, j'avais aussi 7 personnes.
Il y a 3 personnes en ligne.
Voilà. Empezamos. Here we go.
Vous allez.
Non.
Tu vas commencer
Ouais.
Ok, j'allume le micro.
Tu veux donner le son? Salut, bonsoir tout le monde. Tout le monde. I'll switch to English. Hello Rob, Kathleen, Sarah, Martin, thank you for being with us. It's a thin crowd, but it's intimate, and I think the spirit of what we're doing tonight is, on my end, very beautiful and emotional situation. We're here with Adrian and Eliane as well, and the friends of Chocolat. Thank you, Rob, and everybody for this moment that we're about to begin. I just wanted to say before starting, on my end, a few years ago when I moved to Fribourg, I was working on virtual reality. A friend of mine in California said you should read Virtual Realism, a small great book written by Michael Heim. And to my surprise, the book finishes with a sort of an homage to this extraordinary meeting that happened in Fribourg within the frame of the Belloir Bolbec Festival, and talking about this extraordinary event, and with an amazing amount of creativity and artists from all over the world, and somehow shifting the boundaries of consciousness in art and finding sort of a dialogue that I feel ripples to what we feel today and what we need today more than ever in places like Fribourg, and understanding how the limits of technology, reality, the unknown are a part of what makes us artists as well. More recently, even as I was discussing and understanding what this meeting has somehow developed over the last several years through people like Rob and Kathleen. And anyways, to make it short, thank you so much. Thank you, Eliane. Thank you, Adrian. We're here surrounded by your photos as well. The archive of this spirit of the incident that somehow ripples to our day today. Rob, the stage is yours. We're recording as well, so keeping it for posterity.
Oui, bonsoir. Salut tous les Fribourgeois. It's very nice to be here in Fribourg virtually. It's been many, maybe at least 2 decades since I was last there, but I'm hoping that these series of events will lead to a physical manifestation in the beautiful medieval city of Fribourg. So I'd first feeling Quadros for inviting me. Nice beginning here in Patrick. And also thank you to Eliane for allowing me to use some of her images, some of which I can see are being also shown around the space. Apologies, I'm still using some of the low resolution images, but hopefully once Eliane has had a chance to bring them to high resolution, next time I do this, I'll have the high res. And thanks also to Adrienne, who was an enthusiastic participant as a young man back in 1995, and it also helped putting me in contact with a few people. And also thanks to Jeremy Narby, who I don't know will be with us tonight, but he's also contributed a lot to the evolution incident. So I'm just going to share my screen. And okay. So So this event is called the Incident Reimagined. So obviously we hope to have an optimistic viewpoint here. When I first proposed the idea of the incident to the festival committee on the Belvoir Bulldog back in 1994 or 93, I think it was obviously inspired by something called the Roswell incident. And the Roswell incident was an apparent UFO crash landing, and it had actually gained a very large traction among the American and public around the world, and there was somehow a government cover-up going on. I've just come from another meeting. I've been listening to Edward Snowden talking about the cover-up of all the trillions of money that was spent in Afghanistan and Iraq, particularly in Iraq, on completely fake weapons of mass destruction, and also the persecution of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, in particular, who's being held in a high-security prison in London. So, you know, we're not so far away from that very political territory when we talk about UFO cover-ups. But at that time, I was interested as an art curator to think how the artistic community could basically deal with this question of unknowable phenomena that was happening around the world, lights in the sky, sightings, even alien abductions. But also looking at other aspects of reality. So I think it's really good we're calling this aspect of reality, because that is indeed what I'm going to talk about. So, the whole story of the incident started really here. This is the Roden crater in Arizona in 1995, 1993, where I kind of had the idea for the incident, and I was lying down in this crater with the artist who's already pretty well respected, James Turrell. And this is me with Turrell in Fribourg back in 1995. And at that point, I was spending, during 1994, I spent a lot of time driving Turrell around the United Kingdom, because we were involved in trying to plan one of Turrell's sky spaces at a point at which at a point at which a very famous walking path would be linked to the C2C cycle route in Northumberland. And we'd been doing a lot of long drives across the English countryside. And during the course of those drives, I heard a lot of very interesting anecdotes. But just let me go back to when I first visited Turrell. I was in his studio in Flagstaff, Arizona, and above Flagstaff Airport, we were in his studio, and I happened to notice that he had a very large library, probably one of the biggest libraries for UFO literature I've ever seen in my life. So he said to me, Rob, I won't do a Turrell invitation, but this would be something like, so you're interested in flag sources? And I said, well, actually, yes, I am, James, because I'm thinking about this conference, this exhibition, this thing that I'm talking about. I've been going to UFO conferences, and I've been researching how could artists connect with these alien experiences. And clearly I come to the right place, because Turrell himself, and as we discovered through a lot of discussions over this period in 1994, his long drives, that he had quite an extraordinary story behind it. And in the 50s, when he was, or the early 60s, I think, would be more like it, when the Korean War was just finishing, a number of young American men were being called up to that war, which predated Vietnam. And Turrell himself came from a very large ranching family of Quakers, and it had been traditional in that family to refuse military service. In fact, his brother had been sent to prison for actually refusing military service. But James, as he grew up on Grant, had actually spent most of his youth flying crop sprayer planes. And and flying over the ranch. And so he had a pilot's license, and he was also a budding artist and took pictures. So when it came to his very uncomfortable interview with the US military, which he brought his toothbrush and thought he was going to spend the next few months in jail, they said, well, do your religious beliefs prevent you from flying a plane? No. Do they prevent you from taking photographs? No. So he became a U-2 spy pilot. So this is kind of an interesting period of history. You may remember that a spy pilot plane was shot down Gary Powers, and they were sending people up to take photographs behind the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union and China. And it was during one of these U-2 spy pilot missions that Terrell found himself for 30 minutes shadowed by a large disc-like object. He wasn't abducted, but this thing just flew by his plane for 30 minutes, and it flew close. And I said, well, what was it you were seeing, Jeff? Well, it was a flying saucer in the sort of 50s George Adamski style, like you could even see the rivets, he joked. So he had, very early on, his own UFO sighting experience. So if anyone's been to any James Terrell exhibitions, you would obviously find that the sky spaces and these areas for letting in the light, he has this incredible way of using light, also seem to suggest some kind of out-of-body experience that could be similar to that which is described by both UFO people who cite UFOs, but also people who claim to have been abducted. So we felt we had really a good sort of area to continue with. And I was very happy because James agreed to come to Switzerland, and he agreed to co-host the conference and also bring one of his artworks, as we'll see, to NOAA. Just going back though, to Northern England, when I'd been working in 1994, at the same time as driving around in Terrell, I was working with my co-curator Tracy Wall, who has written actually about the incident and was actually at the 1995 incident. We did this project about radical uses of art and technology in a rural context. It may include Radio Tangents, who was working very much in early robotics and with an internet pioneer, Zephyr Robotsky. London Code. Joseph Robotsky, who was working in this deep mine in Cleveland, where the scientists working with dark matter. Kathleen Rogers, whose work we will see in a moment, and Bruce Gilchrist, both of whom became very much fundamentally part of the incident, and Kathleen Rogers also helped very much in advising some of the selections of speakers in both the incident in Fribourg, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but it's then moved to the ICA in London. So, just a little bit about EarthLab. This is Kathleen Rogers' work, SkyNet, and it was a project where she worked directly with spirit mediums in this deserted fault line, which you can see in the distance. And the audience gathered in the churchyard of this church, which you can see, and in the mine, she took part in a seance with these other spirit mediums from the area, and they communicated possibly with the ghosts of miners, and the whole thing was recorded by a BBC outside broadcast camera and transmitted to the audience who were back in this churchyard. So it was a remote, very complicated from the time, 1994, remote performance. So the actual seance was private, although the artist took part. The artist didn't want to be someone separate, sort of studying the medium. The artist wanted to be part of the spirit circle. And you can see them going into a trance, yeah? So this, I think, is a very effective work, and formed the basis for some of the thinking that then went into the incidents in Fribourg. Another view of the mine, a night view of the mine. The seance took place at night, and the audience were on that other side watching. Also, okay, so just to give you some more details on this, they were also being photographed by an infrared camera, which recorded the heat changes. These are often used in by the Society of Psychical Research in investigating paranormal phenomena. This other project, called Ways of Asking Reasons, was based on lucid dreaming and sleep research, where Bruce Gilchrist had previously worked in a lucid dreaming research facility in the United States, and he was attempting to look at changes that happened to physiological changes that happened to the body during a lucid dream, and these glasses are basically designed for detecting rapid eye movement. And then when the rapid eye movement becomes that of a lucid dream, the dream is woken up. This took place outdoors on this shale heap, and this was a former mining industrial area in Cleveland, and the audience could gather and see the sleepers, but also communicate with the sleepers to a buzzer that was connected to them. And the work continued in Fribourg, and we'll see how that happened. But we can see that Earthwire was an interesting precursor to finally finding ourselves here. I'm sure those of you in Fribourg will know this place very well. This is a beautiful photograph by A.N. Archer of the actual Earthwire itself. So, people flew, as they did in those days, from all over the world to take part in this very remarkable meeting of minds, and it's called the Incident. People came from all kinds of areas, all the way from scientists to UFO researchers to anthropologists, people representing indigenous communities, artists, we'll see some of them soon. And this was the event, called the Incident. Very nice design, I thought. And you can see a flying saucer there. The Incident International Symposium to examine art, technology, and phenomena. The other aspect of this, which is really quite surprising, that when I arrived in Fribourg to start organising this, there was little or no internet. I think I was probably in the office of Belvoir, one of the first people in Fribourg to actually have a modem, which, if you remember in those days, dial-up modems could actually make rather extraordinary X-Files type UFO sound. I'm sure some of you remember that noise of the telephone modem, which also served to increase the apparent weirdness of our enterprise. And this, I'm showing you first with Michael Heim. Actually, as Felix has mentioned, described in virtual realism, he actually describes all these people literally arriving into a UFO, this wonderful place coming together. And this is his book, Virtual Realism. And it's very interesting. I'll comment later. Of course, you know, we do have a return to virtual reality, as we know that Rev's project that Felix is doing is indeed a virtual reality project. So I'm very pleased to be involved in the revival of virtual reality. We'll be talking something about a little bit about virtual reality and social media, which is a new development we might look at in future incidents. But this actually turned out to be the first, I think, live internet event that would probably happen anywhere in the world. We were just down the road, as you know from CERN, in Berners-Lee, invented the incident, and as you can see, we had a very early mosaic style screen, which we managed to get provided by a very early technology company called MCNet, NNC Management Communication in Fribourg. And you see there below, there's Jeremy Narby speaking, and we'll go into Germany again in a moment. He is the author of The Cosmic Serpent and many other books, specifically about the way in which indigenous people communicate with what could be possibly alien entities. But in this particular case, we were working with a very famous folk group called the Westerners, who were represented, although they were anonymous, as they appear in these sort of eyeball heads, as you can see in the background on their current website. Homer Flynn came and presented a performance of the Westerners on that internet screen which you saw before. So we were trying to engage all areas of culture, really, from anthropologists to philosophers to pop stars to all kinds of people. And here is a round table in the Belloir, and then you can see these are actually the participants having a kind of pre-meeting before we started. We see to the second on the right, Dr. Jacques Vallée, who's a very famous scientist who spent a lot of time trying to persuade the French government to take sightings of pilots of UFOs seriously, and was the model for the scientist in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and various other people you will see later. And it was a very, this is the opening. It's again, apologies to Eliane, very low resolution. This is this atmosphere of Belloir as we gathered, start thinking about the subjects we were thinking about. And we immediately started getting a lot of reports in the Swiss press. So this is one of the performance of the opening night, and Bruce Gilchrist, who selected the way from the performance, as you can see, on a platform above the opening in Belloir. And well, those of you who speak French, you can see that it's saying that sleeper, gentle sleeper, tell me what's happening in the woods where you're sleeping, something like that. Anyway, and you can see closer up. And so it's kind of an extension of the performance. Again, you wired up with the people watching you. And that's a better shot by Eliane, of him, again, sleeping above while the first presentation is taking place. So Fribourg itself is, as you all know, is a pretty amazingly beautiful and intricate medieval city, lots of little byways and alleyways and medieval streets with gargoyles. It has the river, as you know, running through it. And Kathleen Rogers, in approaching Fribourg and Belloir, decided to address the extraordinary presence of water in Fribourg, and a project with Memory of Water. And she worked with dowsers, with people, water diviners, people who looked for the water, and maps that she researched before she arrived in Fribourg. And here she is actually doing some dowsing. And this is Adrian Lauscher, as a young man, also doing some dowsing, and with some of his friends. They're all giving it a try. And Kathleen also had a lot of army of helpers, because what she did was to look at it. She was very, very interested in the notion that water might have a memory. And so she was gathering water from springs in the river and all over Fribourg and putting them in these bottles, which were part of the installation, the memory of water. So it was a very strong installation. I'm going to show you a video of this now. So I'm going to unshare my screen, and Felix, I wonder if you could just show me the, oops, sorry, excuse me. I can't seem to stop my share. Yeah. So if we can have the first video, please. So, I mean, it's interesting to see this picture of Fribourg in the early 90s because Kathleen, I think, was able to record, and it's actually one of the only video records of anything that actually happened during the incident in 1995 that we have. So more power to Kathleen for actually having got that video, put it on her website, and you can actually find her video, those videos on her website. Kathleen Rogers called. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my share. So we also had an artwork by Trell, his film himself, on Telephone Lock. He had many, already very famous in many projects around the world. But for Fribourg, we have this piece, which actually used in the, it's kind of like a film booth, completely filming this piece now, which is not very good. I'll remember next time. It's like a film booth. You go in and kind of experience an alien abduction experience. And here we see the schematic, which was also on the leaflet for yesterday. So, I suppose the interesting part of this was how far could we go in looking at some very disturbing elements, UFO situation. This is Bud Hopkins, who's also an artist and had been invited actually by James Turrell, who we studied art with. And Hopkins, along with Dr. John Mack, actually was a strong believer that people were being abducted by aliens. This is a picture of what we remember to be a grey alien. That's Hopkins there. So in a sense, he represents the very extreme end of UFO belief. It was interesting. I was actually researching Hopkins, and he died in 2014. And he actually went on to develop his theories in this book, which I think is interesting in terms of where we might go with the subject matter. We'll get come to where we might go a bit later, but I thought I'd put this in, because 2 years later he published this book called Sight Unseen. It's most well known, by the way, for Missing Time, with these sort of personal accounts of UFO abductions. But this one goes into transgenic beings. It's actually really sort of, really looking at what we're now seeing, in terms of biotechnology and CRISPR and gene editing. This is back in 1997. And he's proposing that the aliens were actually producing a transgenic race between humans and aliens, and that they were abducting people to train hybrid beings, half human, half aliens. So, he was pretty out there, this guy, but I was kind of interested in seeing this in 1997, long before we even have synthetic biology, or indeed, we've only just seen gene editing in the last 2 to 3 years. So it's kind of interesting to see how some of these ideas are very, very far-reaching in terms of futures. And Jean Palais, very interesting character. He also became a novelist, a very good novelist, actually, I would say. But he was a proper scientist, he had a PhD, and Palais was interesting because, he basically was someone who wanted governments and was being listened to by governments to actually publish the information we have on the UFO sightings, mainly coming from military planes and also civilian airliners. And it was a great campaign for this sort of transparency. Again, we're just seeing most recently in the release to the White House of UFO sightings, which happens, was kind of slightly overshadowed by the Trump insurgency, but it was also happening at the same time. But interestingly, we also invited this gentleman, Lord Dickinson, who is an English artist, who was responsible, along with people like Doug and Dave, for creating these crop circles in the English countryside. These are actual land artworks, but a lot of people took very seriously, and hold magazines and books and careers devoted to explaining these crop circles. An interesting valet, spoke before Dickinson, unmasked himself as having been behind the crop circles. And he actually said that he thought that the crop circles had been the result of secret government Star Wars type laser experiments, but that he'd actually got his own explanation for the crop circles. So it was one embarrassing, and Dickinson was at the same conference and said, well, now I did it all. Anyway, so it's interesting to see the relationship between art and aspects of reality, which again is the title. And Rod Dickinson was actually at the recent seminar we did on this, organised by Kathleen Rogers at the University of Creative Arts in the UK, on the subject is, which I think Felix has watched and has inspired this event. This is Keiko Sei, a Japanese researcher into telepathy and paranormal. This is Jeremy Narby, who of course lives in Switzerland, quite well-known author, and he's worked with artists such as Luis Eduardo Luna, who also worked with Mary Schengen over the years, and he obviously worked with ayahuasca, the hallucinogenic plant based material, and many of his experiences as a shaman in the indigenous cultures like the Ashaninka do believe that they have had continuous dialogues with the non-human entities who have imparted knowledge which would be of use to a world, particularly a world that's being threatened by the climate disaster. And he continues to work also helping those indigenous cultures to fight the destruction of the rainforests, but also the destruction of their cultures from the political basis in Brazil and Peru. He continues to work with an NGO in Switzerland doing this work. This is Terence McKenna, now died. Terence McKenna was at that point advocating a notion, again, he was very interested in what ayahuasca could teach us. And he was involved in this project called Time Wave Zero. He was trying to basically calculate the Mayan notion of the end of the world, which everyone believed at a certain point, I think was going to be in 2001. No later, 2011. A number of people gathered in a small town in France to witness the end of the world. So McKenna was a very, very charismatic speaker, quite well known, and again fluent in the US. He was on the world tour, lived in Hawaii. And this is Roy Ascott, a very distinguished academic in the UK, who was basically the Buckminster Fuller of the internet. He predicted telematics and also became interested in ayahuasca and shared Gaian consciousness in later years. And Roy is still very active as an artist and an educator in the UK. He was obviously, you can see him in dialogue with a very young looking me. And Christine Stiles, who was from Duke University in the United States, which is very well known for its parapsychology department. And she was doing a lot of research on telepathy and experimental parapsychology, using controlled experiments, which they were famous for doing at Duke University to try and see if it's possible to discover a scientific basis for telepathy. This gentleman, I'm sure all of you in Switzerland know a lot about, is H.R. Giger, and the late H.R. Giger, of course, designer of sets for Alien, and he created a whole new project, which I would love to try to achieve, in which he combined an H.P. Lovecraft type fantasy with the Swiss love of tunneling. Also inspired by the fact that Hitler and Mussolini travelled in a sealed train through Switzerland during the Second World War for their meetings. And also by the kind of Swiss xenophobia about immigrants. He came up with this idea for something called the Swiss Metro, which would be an underground tunnel system for passing through Switzerland without actually going into the country, but would also be haunted by these Lovecraftian aliens. He blew his speeches with German. It was very, very popular. And this is Marco Pelchen, at that point a very young Slovenian artist who did a project, also a sleeping project, where he and his team, including artist Ed Kufa and various other people, were driven up from Slovenia actually during the Bosnian War, so it was actually quite difficult for them to get to Switzerland. And they hooked themselves up to a transmitter, which transmitted to a satellite their various data come from their sleeping forms, and mixed it in with frequencies of CIA transmissions going on during the Bosnian War. It's a very radical work. Marco is now a pretty well-known artist. He represented Slovenia in the last Venice Biennale and is now based in the professor at the University of Santa Barbara. Again, he's been very aware of our revisiting and reimagining of the incident. We hope that he can maybe take part in future editions. This is the artist Anne Bean, who I edited a book on recently called Self, etc. She's actually working with an artist called Ashman Biswas, from Bengali artist working in the UK, who did this very nice work about the notion of the Hindu Vimana deities, the Hindu flying saucers. It was called Homage to the Four Tops. And you can see these ants building these Vimanas, helping to fly these four tops, which he arrived again from the UK in a van full of dancers and performers. We didn't even know how many were coming. We arrived, I think there was about 20 of them, and so we had to sign an accommodation for them. They did a fantastic takeover of the Balois for this multimedia performance, which unfortunately I don't have any documentation, but still look for. And, okay, so I think some context is important here. I've been selected by the committee to a festival, the Festival Balois. I think many of the people involved in the festival began to have some, should we say, some doubts about what we were trying to exactly do here. I think it was a mixture of the fact that what we were doing was totally weird, and also I was mixing some hardcore performance art with this. And I think that this festival, which had previously been very much about dance or visual theatre, I think we got to the point where they were beginning to get a bit of data overload in terms of actually swallowing some of the propositions I was coming up with. And you can see at the opening I'm being presented with this alien, toy alien, which kind of felt a little bittersweet that they kind of were trying to slightly trivialize what we were trying to do there. But anyway, maybe they should have a chance to answer this, because I know there are some people of the committee still very much active, such as Klaus Hirscher, who supported very much my application in the first place, and made Michel Ritter, who could speak for it. But I think that it would be nice if the current festival of Balois were to perhaps acknowledge the fact that we were in fact doing very dangerous breakthrough event. So this, I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was delusions of self-immolation by the Dutch artist Eric Holbein, which involved people basically experiencing a near-death experience with a flame that engulfed their bodies. You can see it here. It's happened in the Belvoir. It's pretty hardcore. And unfortunately, it was regard this performance at the point where it coincided with most of the national press having a press conference, and the mayor of Fribourg was there, and a number of speeches were made. And the interesting thing about this performance is that it only lasted 30 seconds. Had it lasted longer, the person would have died. But unfortunately, it made what may well have been Switzerland's first art shock horror story, which was basically, our taxpayers' money has gone from a 30-minute performance. So it got quite a lot of negative press. We will try to scale the negative press a little bit by doing these community events, like this is the Urban UFO. I think I should also mention that as the director of the Festival of the Belloir, it was important very much to have an educational aspect to it. I was actually running an education workshop at the time when the committee of the festival issued a press release somewhat distancing itself from the subject material of the festival. Anyway, that said, we did it, and it was now Felix is resurrecting or exhuming this festival. I think maybe we can rewrite some of this stuff, just again, UFO doing kind of community, almost a mockery of the idea of UFOs in the streets of Fribourg, which I thought actually was very well written out very well. And the other sign that this, in fact, had become an international success was that one of the artistic directors at the RCA in London, and their assistant actually attended the Fribourg event, and decided this was so successful from their point of view that they wanted to have their version in London's very prestigious ICA. So we did a 3-month, I was invited the following year to become the director of a 3-month I was resident curator. It was the second incident which took place at the ICA in London, and it involved the artist Montano, who would be quite famous, being tied to the performance, the Taiwanese performance artist, whose name I could never pronounce. I was going to try. He was tied to teaching sake, sorry. Minette Lehman, who did again, like Kathy Rogers, who did a seance to basically brings the spirit of her late daughter, Barbara Lehman, who was a performance artist. And we did a much larger version of the James Turrell project. This is called Gasworms, and you remember this. This is actually in a museum. In fact, we did it outdoors in the car park behind the ICA. And we had another conference with various people. And this is the interior. So basically, you're wheeled in on this kind of oven-like object, and you have basically what is essentially a psychedelic experience caused by flashing lights that simulates being abducted by an alien. This is the rock route Shaman to a park, again with Terence McKenna. So the famous Mr. C, who produced the then #1 hit called Ebenezer Good, as in he's a good, but nothing about drugs, of course. And Kathleen Rogers did again a much research project specifically on in this case snake culture in Mayan temples, Mayan snake temple in Uxmal. And she travelled to Mexico, funded by the ICA, to research this project, and they met an unconventional anthropologist group, Jose Diaz Oliero, who basically had a theory that the rattlesnake was a form of an abacus, the storage of knowledge among Mayan cultures. And she created this quite extraordinary installation, again using very radical sound beam technology, in which you could walk into a very dark space and animate this rattlesnake. And we're going to go for the next video, please. So this is Kathleen Rogers' Viper Slats. Again, one of the only video fragments that we have from that event. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and Felix, could you please? I have to escape. Do that. Felix, could you put on the second video, please? Okay, I've just got my presentation back. So this actually was kind of an interesting piece of documentation. Again, that was the only video documentation we had of that event. But this was actually done by the son, this drawing. So Anne B did a UFO sighting, simulated UFO sighting in the Mall, right by Buckingham Palace in London. I was still amazed that we could get permission to do this. But she asked there be no photography or video. Instead, the only documentation was from actually her 6-year-old son, Ezra.
Well, I think you didn't share yet the presentation back.
Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry. I should have screen.
Thanks, Bert.
Okay, so now you can see it, yeah. So this is the only documentation of the ICA incident, which is a drawing by Anne Beat's 6-year-old son, Ezra Rubinstein. Ezra Rubinstein is now actually a professor of philosophy and physics at Stanford University, so he was 6 at the time of this. And this is basically, it's quite interesting that this was literally the only documentation. It's actually a picture of the late Paul Bogle who's playing the drum as the UFOs take off. But there the UFOs you can see off to the right, and the exit of the ICA, where people used drumming and everyone had to come outside to see the UFOs. But this is the only documentation of the London's, apart from the publicity of the incident in London. Okay, so we're going to fast forward 17 years. At the end of the big incident in London, I met the physicist Nicola Truscott, and she basically recruited me to her art science organization called the Arts Catalyst, on the basis that she sort of felt that she said, look, I want to come and persuade you that real science is a lot more interesting than all that UFO and parapsychology rubbish. Come and look at big science, come and look at biotechnology, nuclear science, and zero gravity. And so the next 17 years, I became a science art curator and didn't go near a UFO or ghost or parapsychology researcher for all that time, because unfortunately the world of mainstream science is kind of does have a problem in these areas. I think that's not so much an issue now. I think there's more of an open-mindedness in the scientific community around the unknown or about the unknowable. But for 17 years, this is taken from the Wayback Machine actually, because it's the Arts Catalyst website from 2005. They've actually changed their name now, it's called Arts Catalyst, and they're completely different kind of website, but I was able to use Wayback Machine to look at what the site looked like about halfway through my tenure at the Arts Campus, so we can see the work by Neil White at the Natural History Museum, who I'm still working with, the Microlab, which is a project we did with some of these artists we're still working with, Marco Felton, Angelica Saga from the Oculus Group, 13-0 Gravity, and to the right, James Acorn, which is one of our first artists to work with nuclear shear wheels in Washington. So I can't say it was unexciting that 17 years. It was certainly a gap. So again, fast forwarding 17 years, in 2014, I retired from the Arts Catalyst and became a freelance curator again, and went back to all these tricky subjects, FACT in Liverpool, and also the National Museum of Fine Art in Taiwan. And you can see a group of artists I work with, and there's Evelina Dognich and various other people working in areas again of the unknowable exhibition which I did in 2014, called No Such Thing as Gravity, in 2015. So sparks will be with us today. We'll also maybe be able to comment on some of this with her. I did a project between FACT and Williamson's tunnels called the Ghost Formula about ghosts. And here we have a library of paranormal, and where people could read up on strange phenomena, and this portal, which connected the art gallery with a very mysterious site called Williamson's Tunnels in Liverpool, which were created by a 19th century industrialist. Nobody really knows. They were supposedly wondered why they were built, what he built. It was kind of a strange work creation experience to get people employed. And this is the author himself who gave the opening at the end of FACT. So this is interesting because this is actually using technology developed in Lausanne, just down the road from where you are, by a scientist called Olaf Blanc, who's at the Swiss Institute of Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. And Sarah used this technology to create the experience of seeing a ghost, which is that you basically could manipulate this lever, and then a robotic lever would scratch your back, but there would be a slight time delay, which was the idea was to try and experience that shiver down your back when you saw a ghost. And Sarah has just recently been doing these paintings, which were created during the UK lockdown. This is one of the very famous photographs of paranormal literature of the Enfield poltergeist, in which these teenage girls are being thrown around their bedroom in Enfield. And Sarah could probably comment on that, so I know she's out there somewhere in the ether. So I was trying to find myself somewhere, and I saw that he's just published this very interesting article called Virtual Reality and the Divided World for an organisation in London, actually. And in which he talks about surveillance capitalism and virtual reality. And he goes on to discuss the implications of Facebook having purchased of the Oculus Rift technology, providing a social media experience of being able to play, for example, table tennis on Oculus Rift in virtual reality. And he talks about this division that we have now between technology and the online world. And Michael, back in, when he was talking about virtual realism, alternative world sickness, he's now brought these theories, if you like, to the world of social media, and the way that social media could interact with virtual reality. So, where would a new incident go? Or, from 1995, we were looking at UFOs, parapsychology, what are the issues that cause us anxiety now? Kathleen Rogers, her website, talks about cosmopolitical futures and the anthropogenic human in her art and projects. And I really think that some of our more recent projects will get continued for this a new incident. But what are the other issues? So, for example, we have here the Future of Life Institute talking about AI, artificial intelligence, conscious potential of conscious artificial intelligence, AI potentially being evil and conscious, but then mythical worry, action worry, AI becoming competent, goals misaligned with ours. So in other words, AI deciding they didn't actually need human goals anymore. Robots being the main concern, and again, Follow-back again at the time of the incident was writing about the notion of robots taking over from humans. Basically, no need of a body. The notion of conscious AI would be within the internet, the notion of conscious internet. That's recently been written about by people like Neil Stevenson in his most recent book, which talks about a virtual afterlife where people, after they die, be uploaded and then become part of a large game, similar to Second Life, with dead people. And the idea of AI going out of control. And again, once you have intelligence, you get control. We control the animal world of being smarter. And other aspects of the way the unconscious world deals with our everyday anxieties. So the Centre for Social Dreaming is now talking about global social dreaming, and the history of social dreaming came from the 30s, where a number of people, including people among the Jewish community in Germany, were having nightmares, collective nightmares about what might be happening in Germany, and actually people having very visually realistic dreaming of the trains and the camps, the death camps, the Nazis. And there's has been studied that those dreams are on record by the Centre for Social Dreaming, but now there are many people around the world who are dreaming of the coming climate catastrophe. There's also groups of people recording their dreams about how an uninhabitable Earth would look. So that could be another area we look at in this bit. And then going back to the extraterrestrials, Avi Loeb, who's the professor of physics at Harvard, published this book last year, called Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth, in which this data from an object which was named Oumuamua, which had been detected from an observatory in Hawaii, appeared to show movement that ran counter to any movement that we would expect a meteorite or any other extraterrestrial object to have. It came into our solar system and literally turned right and literally moved away from the sun's gravity rather than being attracted as a meteorite would have been into the sun's gravity and headed off. We never got a chance to actually take photographs of it, but this is a reconstruction of what it might have looked like. I interviewed Avi Loeb for this magazine in France, Mercury, last year, and one of the interesting things that came, you could still read if you could go to the Mercury website, one of the interesting conclusions that Loeb came to was that if intelligent aliens are out there and their technologies are observing us, what might we have to say to them about what we're doing now? In, for example, COP26, which is happening next month in Glasgow, the UK, about this headlong disaster that we're heading to with increased emissions. Will we become a failed planet? Are they watching to see if we become a failed planet? Are are they literally observing us, not to abduct us or exploit us or mine our planet, but just simply deciding whether we are mature enough to be welcomed into the intergalactic community of intelligent species that might actually exist out there. So finally, the incident summed up, I think, and this is again a recent book, they already here, the notion of new mythology, a new mythology represented by these UFO sightings, these seeing ghosts, this idea that folklore, the folklore that one calls witches to be burnt, and people to see demons, and people to see fairies, and extraterrestrial-like beings, whether that the UFOs form part of a new mythology that can, in fact, be studied. And I think that's my final question, and I'd like to pass over to the Q&A. Thank you very much. You can find out more about my work on this website, what we're trying to do. So, thank you all of you. And Felix, if we'd like to maybe turn it over to our guests, both in the back room and then go to Q&A. We have about 20 minutes left. So thank you very much.
Questions? Anybody had any questions, particular questions for Rob?
I should also point out we have both Stella Sparks and Kathleen Rogers here, and Bruce Gilchrist is also here. So we have 3 participants from the previous incident. So the images you see films by Kathleen, the images by Bruce, you've seen images by Sarah from the more recent introduction with gravity.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's wonderful to see and really somehow live again through the incident in such detail. I am more interested in understanding now how you, Kathleen, perhaps even Helene here with us today, who was part somehow of or lived the actual meeting taking place here. What is it today? What is it that we need to focus on today regarding the climate change, the emergencies that we're somehow living as humanity? And is it mainly related to how we are focusing on the limits of our reality? What is it that we are looking for? What is, in this sense, our I wouldn't say desire, but existential need, if you want, for a new or a gathering relating all of these issues today, because there were certainly limits of the technological space and of the creative activity back in 1995. Today we were in a completely different world. It's pretty much as if we were living in a different reality altogether. So in the sense of pushing it forward in time, Rob, Kathleen, how would you envision a sort of a new incident in the sense of even not necessarily be localized in a certain place, more of like a global incident?
It'd be great if I could ask Kathleen maybe.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, because I can't seem to turn my camera on. And it's saying that the host needs to turn the camera on. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not my video.
Okay.
Okay, that's working. And we get the sound. Yeah, I mean, I sound very loud. Let me just turn that down. Well, last March, we were framing the incident really broadly around Jeremy Narby's presence, in a sense, and particularly, the book that he's just recently got out, Plant Teachers. He was in the process of publishing that book. And so the emphasis was quite, the emphasis I took as an academic to frame it really for students, rather than, it's a fantastic story, there are lots of anecdotes, you know what I mean, and they're marvellous, and it's great to return to them. And I think that the original incidents were just so open, they were just open. There was a technological basis. There was kind of, we recognised that technology was bringing in was going to herald in these social shifts. The network, the internet was still fairly new, but very few people had access to it. Everything was terribly expensive to get access to, so only really academics or research centres or computer science departments, owned the technologies, let's say. And so it was very uneven. It wasn't a very democratising place to be. And I suppose that what was interesting then, it remains, I think, extremely vital now, is this kind of the freedom to speculate and not to know. On one hand, we've got the freedom to speculate and not to know, and brainstorm and think, imaginatively, and then at the other hand, you're kind of aware of how the politics, the ownership now of technology. For instance, that's interesting that Heim has always really understood, I think, this relationship between technology and the military and kind of the ownership of, in the case of today of childhood, that childhood's being kidnapped, let's say, by social media. So, I think that these two things were kind of running in parallel, and now I think that one could take some of the themes of the incident and really unpack them in a new way. I mean, it's not easy to say. Like, I'm interested in VR still as a metaphor, for instance, for this disassociated kind of state of being, the embodied state, the physical state, this kind of, what we've inherited, let's say, materially, each of us, genetically, our genome, our unique genome, those kind of ancestral roots, what we are as physical beings, and the risks, involved in that. And then, in a sense, the simulation, when one positions oneself, let's say, in another type of, I suppose, apparatus.
Great, Kathleen, because talking about technology, I know that Bruce Gilchrist, who is here, has just finished a really intensive period of research on new technologies in his recent PhD, which is late in life PhD. Bruce, can you comment on any of those things that Kathleen were talking about? Are you there? Bruce, is anybody there?
Hello.
Hello?
Hi. I have a fundamental concern around terms, around language, and consensus around what exactly it is that we're talking about. At any time. I mean, those slides that you showed are around robo-apocalypse, and AI, the kind of fear of the singularity, etc. I mean, anyone vaguely interested in AI right now, I highly recommend looking at Daniel Lufer's Mozilla project, the AI Myths project. And his colleague Alexa Steinberg on that project, and she made the comment that she's going to all of these conferences and symposia around Europe around AI. Everyone is talking about something different. She's talking about how difficult it was to actually have a meaningful conversation that is kind of focused on something that's got a certain amount of consensus around it. And when you start to try and define what exactly AI is, it becomes very difficult. It's actually a suite of technologies all kind of interrelated, interacting, and doing different things. And if you ask a data scientist, for instance, for a definition of AI, it depends on what their vested interest is. It depends on what they're looking at, and they'll give you a definition. Pedro Domingos calls it the AI tribes. So I think for me, in order to have conversation, there really needs to be some kind of consensus about the terms that people are using, and the kind of the definitions that are kind of underpinning the kind of language that's being used. I think that's really fundamental. I don't think you can get very far without actually finding a way of dealing with that lack of consensus around language.
Yes, Bruce, I'm really glad you said all of that, because what you saw on the screen at the end of the incident presentation was the result of a very quick web trawl of areas that I thought could be a concern for a future incident. They were not well researched. They were literally very instant, kind of like, poll of what was out there if you did conscious AI.
It's out there, but that's a result of really lazy journalism quite often.
Yeah, I know. It was just to maybe give some examples of what was out there, and I really appreciate the examples you just gave, because that can inform us a bit more on how we might move forward about dealing with this lack of consensus on AI. It sounds to me like that's a really hot topic and kind of very interesting issue, which is why I know that you've been immersing yourself in this. So I apologise for just coming out with the first thing I could find. I was just signposting where the new incident could go. It wasn't meant to be a serious piece of research.
Sure, no, I understand.
Sarah, are you out there? Sarah Sparks?
I'm here.
Yeah. Do you have any comments?
Well, as you know, Robin, you've shown a few examples. It's ghosts that I'm interested in, and I would just say that ghosts are ubiquitous. And whatever direction that you think that, or you decided or discussed for a new iteration of the incident, and whatever technologies you were looking at, the ghosts would get in. And I'm really interested in how we make ghosts and how we make them, the evolution of the ghosts evolve with us. And I think that's something that's from the very earliest recorded histories, the earliest technologies, there is always, as well as the known and unknown gets in, and whether that is something to do with the unconsciousness, whether it's an internal mechanism or it's external, it still always speaks to us about things that we don't know. And for me, a ghost it's a way that we can speak about the gap between what we know and what we don't know. So being alive and being dead. We have no evidence for what that is like. We know we'll die, but unless you have a belief system, and a belief system is not a scientific system, it's a belief system. A belief system will explain to you what happens when we die, but we don't know. And I think that's why we'll always have ghosts, and they can find their way into AI, into whatever is the technology, the current technology, or the current thought, the current entertainment. So I would still say that for me it would be about how to find a ghost formula. How do you make a ghost?
Thank you, sir. I'd like to ask Felix a question now, because Felix, you're basically working with VR.
Yes.
What do you bring to this? I mean, in terms of like these areas that could be explored in terms of the incident, but also cause controversy, like for example Michael Hines and what Kathleen said, the kidnapping of childhood by social media and the integration of VR with social media, and possibly having a sort of a slightly sinister element with the way that Facebook, acquired Oculus and is now using it in terms of what was called, I think, surveillance technology, surveillance capitalism. What's your view of that?
Yes, indeed, Facebook is focusing on the multiverse right now. I think, I relate definitely. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I definitely relate to Kathleen when you talk about virtual reality in a metaphorical way. I understand the virtual.
You need to speak up, Felix. We can't hear you.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
The virtual as potential. It was Paracelsus who used to describe the virtus of a plant, something that is not the actual form, but the possibility of growth. And this I find my interest in this area specifically is perhaps more related to a narrative aspect rather than a technical or technological expansion. How do you relate an individual and a deeply individual situation to a more social or a more open environment? How does imagination grow from such an environment, such a virtual space? I think going back to Michael Hines' virtual realism, I do find an answer on how technology will also relate to our spiritual sense, and taking technology beyond the manipulative aspect that we have today, or that we've grown accustomed to today through social media, specifically in other spaces as well, to something more creative. There's a quote that I'd like to finish with, which is from virtual realism. Michael Hines talks, of course, about virtual reality, but we can talk about this in many other situations, including perhaps a relationship with a sense of consciousness through artificial intelligence. It says, VR might become our strongest adaptogen. It might teach us to return to our Earth rather than destroy or escape it. We might create communication systems with new depth, with greater scope and intimacy, greater respect and distance than ever before. That system might lend grace to our bodily selves and healing to our planetary anxieties. So I think it's really a space of sharing rather than a space of escape. The paradigm that we're actually confronting now, specifically through virtual spaces, and the possibility also of experiencing reality in so many different ways. When we talk about reality, what is it that we're talking about? The possibility also of presenting an artistic space through questioning ourselves. What is reality and how we construct it? I think that is specific to a sharing experience of an individual space through technology.
Kathy?
No, I'm just saying, I mean, I love the positivity of that. You know, I love that, that's, I'm just thinking, I've been teaching, for quite a long time, so I've got, close contact to numbers of young creatives each year, and so I see the themes, I see how young people are arriving, with this fantastic creative potential. They're provided with a tool set, they're provided with a library, methods of working, and learning experience, and then I'm kind of, I'm interested in the themes that they develop, so this year we've got a lot of students who are working with VR in the games, if I was games arts, they're all VR, they're all, developing games in terms of taking on all the different roles, world building, interaction, narrative, and then we're seeing a trend for mixed reality, performative events, green screen, kind of dynamic backgrounds, what do they call it, sort of very aligned cameras, so almost like a kind of do-it-yourself Hollywood, so if you think of the Jungle Book, green screening, the characters talking to animals aren't there, Roger the Rabbit, now it's all got, in a sense now what one's got is a kind of tool set that exists in different arts universities, say, not just in the arts universities. And at the moment, nobody quite knows how to fit it together. If you're a game student, you know what you're going to do. You're going to make a game, make it a but if you've got a kind of loose toolkit, OBS, a green screen, a camera, some software, you can put together a theatrical virtual event that is a montage of layers, and that is a kind of on trend at the moment. I'm just saying, so in my third year, I've got 3 or 4, 5, 6 students who say, I want to do this in VR. I want to hack into the games engines, Unity and Unreal Engine, and use it in a different way. And it's all become rather possible to do that, where it wasn't even a couple of years ago. So 360 cameras now off the shelf, get an app for that, 3D scanning. So students are kind of thinking about, in a sense, these simulations and these awkward hybrids as a form of expression. I've seen quite a lot of VR work recently. It has that kind of spiritual aspect. I think it lends itself to mandalas, portals. You're standing physically in one space, but you're moving, as it were, as if in a dream.
Yeah, I just want to say
that's what I'm saying. So aesthetically and technically, it's all kind of come together as an available, not to everybody.
I think the important thing of what you've just been saying there, Kathleen, is that engaging young people who are trying to work with technology should possibly be part of a future incident. And it's kind of interesting that one young person who's here tonight, who's very influenced in his life by being around you and your project, is Adrian, for example, who's now become a curator. And I'm just interested in hearing, because we're running over now, the people who are there in Fribourg, if anyone has, like Adrian or Eliane. Eliane is Adrian's mother, by the way. But Adrian, we saw lots of these pictures of you as a young man.
Hey, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob.
Hello.
So, what's the question?
The question is, we've just been talking about young people and how they might be influenced by a new incident. And you were a young person when we did the incident. So I'm interested to hear a little bit about that. how you felt as a young person, how you feel as a mature person, and having been affected a little by that event.
Water is very important for me now. And I can understand why Africans use Facebook and social media as a juju tool, and they can send you, you know, bad vibes and bad things happening into your life just by sending you emails, hacking into your phones. And for us it's maybe difficult to understand, but last time you were talking with Kathleen online, you guys were talking about how there is electricity in technology, and how this electricity could be captured by shamans or juju sorcerers, and now they are able to do it. So we're talking about virtual reality, but I think there is also some kind of really organic virtuality or shamanic virtuality that is something totally separated from what we're talking about right now. We don't know about it because it's happening in the markets of Jakarta or the markets of Lagos, and they have been there into some kind of cider cafes in Cameroon, for example, and this is a world like, what does it mean for them? What we're talking about right now is something also very different, I think, and it's a reality for them. For us, it's virtual, but for them, it's real.
That's very interesting. I mean, we do have as well another guest, Adam Zaretsky. I don't know if Adam wants to, because you were talking or introduced this thematic of CRISPR technology. I mean, it does relate, Adrian, to what you were saying in a sense of what we're not really understanding. Sometimes what we're kind of hacking into. Hi, Adam. Hi.
Great to see you, Alice. I didn't realise you were here.
Yeah.
I heard your call, Rob.
So there's a kind of, you know, I was recently at a workshop by some, you know, Adam and I have some colleagues in common, of course, and it was a CRISPR workshop, and it was a kind of hobbyist almost approach to trying to introduce CRISPR on a practical level, literally on a practical level, but sort of then looking at it, I suppose, in quite abstract ways, you know, the ethics around it, but also the nature of chemistry. You know, what is it that's being introduced and hacked into just on a molecular level? Let's say on a molecular level, what's not really understood. You can manipulate something without understanding it, let's say. And then, I'm not saying this is a necessary way forward for the incident, but you know, it does open up a really huge, important, you know, number of debates. It's to do with AI. You know, AI, for instance, like you were saying, Bruce, I agree, we can't talk about anything because everything is context specific. But everything seems to unravel so quickly and become interdisciplinary that it is, you know, it is quite difficult to be effective. But what do you think, Adam, about...
Yeah, can we just say this is going to be the final word, because I actually have to come offline. I've got a bandwidth issue soon. And I believe we were supposed to finish at 7:30 European time, 8:30 European time, 7:30 UK time. So Adam, would you like to give us a final word?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I wanted to say that I love this topic because I have a 15-year-old son who's asking 7,000 questions about particle physics to me, and not all of it makes sense, and part of it is about his emotions, and I'm not sure if he's doing cosmic consciousness or if he's actually talking about black holes. And I try to stop him, but then I read him poetry instead, and sometimes that's way better. I like the idea of continuing the teenage philosophical process of not knowing what reality is. So I'm really glad that this still exists. I often say that if scientists run out of quandary, if they solve everything, if there is a unified theory, then they're out of a job. And so they need the enigma that they try to erase. But when it comes to this CRISPR stuff, we get some kind of obsessed about transgenic humans. But I tend to think that we don't know what the gene does in the genome. We know what result we want. If we get it, we think that's all it's doing. But it's a multifactorial thing. So the desire to put poetry into the human genome in the name of engineering is actually creating more enigma in our species, in our inheritance. So we're actually inserting poems in the name of eugenics. It's a really obscure situation, but not any more obscure than the things that you were covering. I mean, if you're mixing the UFOology and the resonance, I'm quite pleased to say, yes, you're really on to things. These debates haven't ceased, and in a lot of ways, philosophy is not dead. And so I'm glad to hear that people are still interested in quandary. So I'm just applauding you for raw philosophy and relinquishing true knowledge in the name of true questioning. It's a way better tact. We don't know where we are still. So that's, thanks for celebrating. Also, I was in Fribourg at the Swiss Mechatronics Society doing a DNA lab with Mark from Bacteria in Zurich. And so Fribourg is great for thought.
Well, let's hope they'll see you as a new incident. Felix and I are trying to plot something, and let's all, continue to look for the known unknowns or the unknown knowns or whatever they are. And let's do the incident too. Maybe, with some of you here and some younger people as well. Nice.
I'll bring my orange third eye.
Sounds great. So thanks very much for all your contributions. Thanks again to Felix for bringing this all together.
Thank you.
Unless anyone has anything really burning, I'm going to ask Felix to close and make any closing remarks.
Just enormous gratitude to everybody, and thank you so much for being here in presence and virtually, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Love to all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.